East German opposition and activism. Because non-state organizations were prohibited in the GDR, networking and coordination between activists was informal. Independent groups and networks stayed in contact through newsletters and exchange of campaign materials, and there was a mix of local, regionally coordinated, covert, and open actions. Activists in the GDR also campaigned on issues that we feel similarly to many campaigners today: anti-nuclear and peace issues, challenging economic paradigms of growth and consumption at any cost, resistance to an undemocratic state and its activities, propagating and practicing sustainable choices versus exploitation of environment and animals. There was a strong emphasis on DIY culture, do-it-yourself culture, with egalitarian, equitable principles. Politically, most activists in the GDR in the 1980s self-defined as socialist or anarchist. The Stasi and Zersetzung. After the East German Popular Uprising of June 1953, what are the odds that it's 2023? Suppressed by Soviet troops, the government gave the Stasi the task of systemic surveillance, prevention of unrest in its population. Initially, this took the form of brutal physical repression, imprisonment, and physical abuse, including torture by police and secret police. But this changed during the 1970s when the GDR became more interested in gaining a positive international image, and the repression of activists became more subtle. The Stasi redefined the military term Zersetzung, attrition or coercion, to name their harassment tactics. The aim was to disrupt the working of groups and the lives of individuals to such a degree that their activism became ineffective or, more preferably, ceased altogether. The aim of the Zersetzung was to switch off the group by rendering it ineffective, with an interim goal of hindering any positive media or public exposure. Their usual ways to switch groups off were to: 1. Create conflict between members. Particularly useful subjects for sowing discord were those of philosophical or political nature, money, or personal/sexual relations. 2. Hinder and sabotage activities by the use of one or more infiltrators who would agree to do tasks but not get around doing them. Loose materials and equipment, repeatedly request changes and further edits of materials to slow down production. Attempts to divert the group into more harmless activities. And the last one, isolate the groups from other activities, e.g. by spreading rumors regarding unacceptable behavior and political views, etc. The choice of tactics in any particular case was based on extensive psychological profiling and intelligence on the group members, particularly who plays what role, who fulfills what kind of task, and what are the relationships between the group like, who hangs out with whom. Informants, Infazil Mitarbeiter, were usually, and I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, were usually a way to gain information on the group, and were also used to implement the plans and incapacitate a group and sabotage its activities. In activity circles, the informants were also never Stasi or police officers, but were usually existing members of the groups who had been pressured, persuaded, or blackmailed into helping the Stasi. Alternatively, a sustainable outsider would be recruited to infiltrate the group. How did the Stasi persuade people to become informants? Appeals to patriotism, cash, or material reward, blackmail, e.g. offers of immunity from threatened prosecution, and the last one, making the mission sound like an exciting adventure. Zersetzung of the individuals. As in the case of groups, the Zersetzung of individuals had the aim of switching off that person's efficiency by undermining their confidence and their belief in the value of their activities. The Stasi did not usually care whether an individual was switched off through disillusionment, fear, burnout, or mental illness. All outcomes were acceptable, and people's mental health and social standing during or after an operation were of no concern to the officers involved. Worrying about informants, the Stasi made little secret of the fact that they used informants and, in fact, deliberately helped spread rumors about informants. This was the cheapest and most effective way to incapacitate groups and individuals. The Zersetzung of individuals was usually carried out by systemically undermining the target's quality of life, both socially and in the workplace, with the intention of simply destroying the target's confidence. The tactics took various forms, such as spreading slanderous rumors, causing trouble at work, etc. Rumors and information, such as about unacceptable political viewpoints, inappropriate behavior, the possibility that maybe an informant, etc., that was passed on to work colleagues, bosses, and social circles might be based on true facts, but were often plausible untruths that were difficult to or impossible to refute. The first stage of Zersetzung was the comprehensive evaluation of state-held data and information, e.g. medical records, school reports, police records, intelligence reports, searches of targets' residence. At this point, they were looking for any weak points, social, emotional, or physical, that would be used to pressure on a target, e.g. extramarital affairs, criminal records, alcoholism, drug use, differences between the target and their group, e.g. age, class, clothing styles, that could be exploited to socially isolate them. After this detailed Zersetzung strategy was drawn up, what was the specific aim? What tactics should be used to exploit the target's personal situation, the character traits, and what was the time scale. The next stage was often to supplement covert surveillance with overt observation in order to communicate that the target that they were of interest to the Stasi and to create a sense of insecurity and paranoia. Tactics included questioning, repeated stop and searches, strange noises on telephone lines, conspicuous visits to the workplace so that the bosses and colleagues were aware of the police interest, etc. The final stages entailed psychological and physical harassment, moving things around at home. One morning, the alarm clock goes off at 5 a.m. instead of 7 a.m., and the socks are in the wrong drawer. There's no coffee left. Damage on bikes and vehicles, e.g. slashing tires. The spreading of rumors, as mentioned above, ordering goods, and making appointments in the target's name, etc. Families were often used as leverage against activists at this stage, either as a method of blackmail, e.g. family members subjected to opposition or oppression as a way of putting indirect pressure on the activist, or persuasion. Your daughter will land in deep trouble if she remains involved in that group. Can't you make her see sense? It's her career at stake. Physical harassment often included repeated arrests, physical attacks on the street, e.g. by plainclothes officers, or abuse and assault could be indicated by the rumors that they had spread, e.g. bullying at work, avoidance by neighbors. How effective was the Stasi, paralyzing groups and individuals? The military organized Stasi simply couldn't understand how many activist groups functioned without leaders and hierarchies. They often mistook informal hierarchies caused, for examples, by indifferences of environmental levels of dominant behavior patterns or organizational structure. They would target those who talked the most or took on the most tasks and didn't realize that even if these individuals were switched off, the rest of the group could continue to function and would necessarily fall apart. The dedication of groups was also often underestimated. Even if informants successfully sabotaged a group's activities, the group would rarely be completely disinherited, but would try all the harder to achieve their goals. The tactics of Zersetzung had a significant control function. If you were engaged in or merely suspected of activities that the Stasi didn't like, then repression was the way to punish you. Not unlike the commonly used extrajudicial punishment practiced by the police in Britain today, the threat of ASBO's severe bail conditions and requirement to repeatedly answer bail, etc. The human cost of Zersetzung is hard to quantify. Many GDR activists are still suffering from burnout, trauma, chronic mental health issues as a result of being targeted. On a personal level, the Stasi was frighteningly effective gathering and using intelligence. Informants were just deployed to sabotage group activities and implement Zersetzung plans, but also to gather intelligence on individuals and groups around 160 kilometers worth of Stasi archives survived the end of the GDR. Most intelligence was used to evaluate relationships and activities, which then led to extension of intelligence gathering to previously untargeted individuals and groups. And as a basis of planning Zersetzung operations, obviously plans for actions and activities were also reported, but these were acted upon only in rare and serious cases if intelligence were used to disrupt the activities of any obvious way. Dealing with Zersetzung, many people succumb to the pressure of the Stasi and other security forces, often because of mental health difficulties brought about by the pressure or through the process of that was commonly called inner migration, giving up political and social beliefs, following the path of least resistance, and ceasing oppositional activity. On the other hand, resistance to Zersetzung was remarkably commonplace, and activists found ways to remain both healthy and active. When East German activists talk today about how they managed to continue their activism, the same points come up again and again. They were summarized below. Support from friends and other activists were essential. A circle of close friends was shared. An understanding of the political and policing situation was probably the most effective way to counter the Stasi. With such friends, activists could talk openly about fears, suspicions, and needs. They could work out ways to deal with the pressure. They spent time with their friends doing non-activism related activities, which helped to build trust in the group. This helped them to know that if things got bad for them, they could both trust their friends and trust them and be trusted by them. They would be there if help and support were needed. As a group, they would make plans for possible situations. For example, who would take care of the children in case of arrest or even imprisonment, or who could provide a safe house if somebody was being shadowed and needed a break. On a wider level, the solidarity between groups was an important factor in their survival and freedom to remain active. These groups that had strong relationships with others around the country were generally subject to less repression in later years, particularly in East Berlin. Even when repression happened, widespread solidarity actions and concerted efforts to gain publicly led to quick results, arrested or imprisoned individuals released, and the group allowed to resume, etc. On the other hand, those groups that weren't so well networked, usually those in small towns and rural areas where they might be the only activists, were easy picking for the Stasi. At times, whole regions of the country were cleansed of grassroots activism. Groups openly discussed the possibility of surveillance and intervention. The groups would aim to work out what oppression measures they might be subject to currently in the future and thinks of ways to deal with them. The hard bit was not to get lost in paranoia, particularly because there was no good chance that the group already had an informant present, nor to be naive or ignorant about the possibilities, but to find a middle ground of sensible measures that would, if needed, help while not bogging the group down in extensive security measures that would just hinder the work of the group. Part of working out the level of threat from the Stasi and how to deal with it was to consider the way the group worked and how often and how open the group was to newcomers. It was tempting to think and preparing to carry out actions, and the utmost secrecy would be the best defense against an opponent like the Stasi. But of the groups we know about which worked covertly with the GDR were all subject to brutal Zersetzung measures, while those working openly were often subject only to surveillance and sabotage by informants, but could nevertheless carry on their activities to the greater or lesser extent. When open groups were subject to extraordinary repression levels, they were in good position to mobilize support from other groups and interests from West German media. It's difficult to draw conclusions through generally only those from open groups are willing to speak of their experiences, and any group or in any covert group that might have survived would be by definition hard to find out about. Working openly also did not preclude and did not work secretly at times, particularly when planning an action or dealing with the sensitive issues. The steps would often be taken to avoid surveillance. If a group identified an individual as a possible informant, they might have decided not to take any obvious initial action. An immediate reaction would be to access whether there might be any merit in the suspicions rather than to spread rumors. The usual way of dealing with the situation would be for a few trusted individuals to discreetly research the suspect. Backgrounds would be checked, and there any family members. Do they exist? Has anyone else from the group spoken to them? What about friendships outside groups? Did the suspect actually work where they said they did? Are they familiar with the town they say they grew up in, etc.? This worked well. It was easy to get lost in analyzing the techniques of the Stasi used, and the more you look into it, the more frightening it gets. But it's worth mentioning that, in our assessment, the grassroots opposition movements made the biggest contribution to the revolution that started in East Germany in autumn 1989, despite the horrifying levels of repression and surveillance that they had faced for decades. Quite simply, the Stasi failed to predict the events of the year, and once things had started, their Zersetzung tactics became ineffective. The Stasi used a scent approach, collecting odor samples from suspects to strengthen their files. Oh wait, this is